Hey, welcome to Diode Press. I'm Graham. Today we're going to use this laser cutter to cut this wood block and print a calendar on the etching press. Let's get to it. I've wanted to create a calendar for years, and so this year I finally did it. I've spent months experimenting and testing to get really good results cutting wood blocks on the laser cutter. And so I think I finally have it down. So thanks for checking out the video, and I hope it helps you with your project. So first let's have a quick chat about tools and materials. So I'm using MDF wood as the woodcut block as the base for my calendar. But honestly, I'd probably look into something other than MDF. When you cut it on the laser cutter, it makes a lot of kind of sticky residue. I think it's all the glue content in the wood, but it holds up really well to printing and it keeps the really fine details. So something to look into. After you carve the block, you'll need a way to print it. So I'm using my Kakash etching press to print the calendar, but you could also print something like this by hand using a wood spoon or a printmaking baron to rub the paper onto the ink. Either of those work. The etching press is the easiest. As far as the paper goes, I'm using French's speckle tone paper, and it's just a white paper, but they sell every color and style you can think of. I think it might look nice on like a craft paper also. In today's video, I'm going to be printing it just on the white speckle tone paper. But in a few weeks, I'll have them listed up on my website, and I'll probably have some options to have them in craft and the white paper. So for this project, I'm going to be using the Speedball oil-based ink, but you could also use, Speedball professional inks. They have a whole range of products, and then there's Creality has a whole line of inks that are similar, oil-based water cleanup, soap and water cleanup. And so finally, you're going to need a way to carve your block. On my channel, I have dozens and dozens of videos about different printmaking processes, woodcut, lino cut, tutorials from start to finish. So if you want to look at any of those videos, I'll link them down below. But I really enjoy mixing technology with my printmaking, so I'm going to use the laser cutter. And I know to some printmakers that's blasphemy and it's going to upset some people, but to me it's just another tool in the studio. And it opens up the world of printmaking to people who either don't want to hand carve a block or can't hand carve a block. So it's just another tool. But if you don't have a laser cutter, you could use traditional printmaking carving tools. There's numerous sets you can get for, ranging from a couple dollars to, hundreds of dollars for a set. So the laser is just going to be one fun way to do it. So the laser I'm using today is the Creality Falcon 2. It's a 22 watt laser. And Creality sent me this laser to test out and use in some projects and see what I thought about it. And I think in my previous video I did a project using this, and I've used it pretty much daily or every other day for months now, and I absolutely love it. I have no issues. Super easy to use, and it works really good for cutting wood blocks, especially the MDF. It has a really high resolution, so you get a lot of really good detail in there. And honestly, it would cut right through the whole block if you wanted it to. And so it has no trouble cutting a nice deep layer for the engraving. So that way when you ink it up, all that background's not printing. So let's jump into creating our image. So I use Procreate on my iPad and just the Apple Pencil to do the illustration. And I started with an online download for just a generic calendar, just so I had all the numbers right. And then I drew all the rest just using the iPad. And like most projects, I made it super, super complicated and then pared it down at the end to something more manageable and that kind of looks better. But originally there was a whole background image, there was multiple blocks, but I'm really happy with the final result. And each cluster of the calendar is supposed to represent one of the 7 simple machines. And this is a really easy workflow to go from a digital drawing right to the laser cutter and just jumping over to Lightburn next. So once I have my image drawn in Procreate, I brought it over to Lightburn, which is a paid program, but it works really good for this kind of laser cutting work. So since the image is going to take hours to do, it's about 2 hours per each section. I broke it into 3 pieces, so that way I could do it in different sessions, and if I mess something up, I could always just cut it out. And they're set up as an image to cut at 15,000 millimeters a minute and 80% power. So I took my wood block, and you put it in the bed of the laser, and it comes with this small tool. And you just set that on your block, tighten the screws, and now it's perfectly focused for this material. Then you just have to throw on your safety goggles, and you're good to go with making your cuts. I did my cutting in an enclosure, but just so you can see the actual machine here, I took it out so you could get a better look at it. And so when I was cutting it, this laser has an air assist that's controlled by the machine itself. And so depending on what you're doing, you might want the air assist or you might not. So some of the background areas, I had the air assist turn on, and that helps clear out the background better. But then for some of the finer engraving detail, turn the air assist off, and that way it keeps it a little bit cleaner and you get a little bit better detail for engraving. And to cut this, most of the time it was at 80% power, and I think I was running it at like 15,000 millimeters a minute, which was super fast. And you can see the different pieces here. And I cut in these lines, so when I came back the next time I could verify nothing moved. And because I did have to put the block in one position, and because it was so big, then move it down to another position. And so I used those cut lines to line up my artwork. To print this one, I'm going to be using this Speedball relief ink, and this is an oil-based relief ink. I've really been enjoying this series of ink from them. My other favorite that I've been using recently is the Speedball Professional. The Super Graphic Black is a really nice black ink. Another really good relief ink is this Gamblin Portland Intense Black I like. And then if you want some other easy cleanup, so the Speedball Professional, you can clean those up with soap and water. The oil-based inks, you can use vegetable oil, or I use this Terpenoid Natural. It's non-toxic cleaner, and it cleans it up with no trouble. And then Cranfield has another set of ink. They are releasing their oil-based and washable, just like the Speedball Pro. Just soap and water washes away. So let's get out our ink and get ready to print. So this is a brand new can, but I think it might have been sitting for a while because it has a bit of a crusty, dusty layer there on top here. And so with ink, you always want to just scrape the surface. If you gouge the ink, you're going to upset every printmaker that you ever come across. Because as you dig into it, wherever air gets exposed, it'll dry up. And so eventually you just have a can full of useless ink. So if you always just scrape it off the surface like this, your cans will last a lot longer. But honestly, I prefer getting my ink in the tube. It's even easier, you don't have to worry about it, to not make a mess. And this ink works great right out of the can. You don't have to do any modifiers. You can get things to make inks thicker, thinner, dry faster, dry slower. You know, people like to make things dry quicker. There's, you know, cobalt dryers and things that are super toxic. I prefer just let it sit on your paper and it'll dry out. Some of the water-based or water cleanup type inks do much better if they're in contact with the paper. So if there's a really thick layer, it's really never going to dry, but whatever is in contact with the paper dries up pretty quick. But the oil-based ink, these dry in a couple days, it'll be ready to go, ready to pack up and ship. It's only about 40 degrees right now in the studio because it's an uninsulated garage. So spending a little bit, just getting the ink a little bit warmed up and loosened up. That way it flows and prints a little bit easier once it gets on the block. Yep. And for this print, I'm going to be using my Takash roller. This is one of my prized possessions right next to my etching press. They're not cheap, but they're amazingly well built and they'll last forever. And they machine each one and it's a perfectly smooth surface, so you get a really nice roll up with your ink. All right, we're ready to ink up the block. You can tell you have enough ink, it makes a nice sound on the brayer. And I designed this image with enough pieces sticking up that I can kind of just roll across it, not have to worry too much about inking up the background. And I think on this print, a little bit of background printing actually looks kind of nice. Doesn't count if you don't do it for Instagram. Another thing that'll upset printmakers, never store your brayers with the roller side down. Always rest it so it's not touching. Or you get flat spots on the top of the rollers. And when they're, you know, $200, you don't want that. Next up, we're gonna print. So to line up the paper on the block and on the press, I have a little registration jig here, so you can see it. And so I sell these on my website. So they're laser cut acrylic, and they have a numbers and a grid of an 1/8 of an inch. And so you can perfectly align the block to the corner, and then you can align the paper onto whatever grid you want. And I use just some pieces of tape here just to remind myself where to put the paper each time. And with a single color print like this, it's not as critical, but if you're doing a multiple color, multi-block, you can get the block lined up perfectly in the jig. And then every time you line up the paper in the same spot, you can swap out your different color blocks and they'll line up perfectly on top of each other. So there's the block. Next we have our sheet of paper. Line that up. So I line it up along the tape here. And then I'm using one of these self-healing cutting mats. I put this on it and this just helps distribute the pressure a little bit more even. In the past I had a rubber mat that I use, but this is pretty hard so it doesn't push the paper too far into your block. And then you just run it through the press. Typically I just go one way through the press, but it's easier to show the print on this side for the video, so I'll run it back the other way. Sometimes your paper can slide and give you a little bit of a smear, but I think it'll be okay. Take off our mat. There it is. And so I'll probably wait for these to dry before I actually cut them down. So in the meantime, I'll just hang them up here. Come back in a couple days and they'll be good to go. All right, and so here's the finished calendar, cut down and ready to ship. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up with new projects and leave some comments down below if you have any questions about anything I've gone over. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Thanks for watching. To keep up with the videos when they're posted, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you want to help support this channel, you can check out the Diode Press Patreon page, where I post behind the scenes photos as well as other patron rewards. Thanks!